Hey guys, my name is Christina. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to this week's edition of Tuesday Newsday. And we are talking about the slap heard around the world. Yes, you know what I'm talking about. Will Smith slapping Chris Rock at the Oscars. So, it's all over the news. We've all heard the stories. We all have a perspective and opinion about it. I'm just here to share mine. The point I want to focus in on here is the point of forgiveness. Forgiveness. Let me ask you, how many times have you acted in a reaction? You've acted out of an impulse, out of an anger, out of an emotion that later you then regretted. That later you could see in hindsight, I shouldn't have done it. I crossed the line. How many times have you done that? And how many times have you been willing to own up to it and say publicly, I made a mistake, it was out of line, it was unacceptable, and I shouldn't have allowed it? How many people have done that? When I saw the clip and I looked a little bit into the story, I could really feel for Will Smith. Honestly, my heart went out to him. You know, he had this big kind of successful night, this kind of like peak of his career, you know, he was being celebrated. He won the Oscar for this amazing role he did about this amazing story. And it's being now shadowed by this incident that took place that he acted out of a reaction. Like, he acted in a reaction. He got mad and he acted out and saw the error of his ways. And so my question here is, can we forgive Will? Can we forgive him? And ultimately, can we forgive everybody? Because everybody added something to the pot to create that moment of creation. Like, it wasn't just Will Smith. It wasn't just Chris Rock. I mean, every person there, you could say, played a role in the creation of that moment because everyone was a witness to that moment. And so it's like that co-creative atmosphere, like everyone came together and this moment manifested. And yes, of course, not to take away from Will's responsibility to his behavior and who he is, but the question here is, how many times have we acted out in anger or reaction and later regretted our behavior? So I think what's most important for us as humanity, the way to look at this, and honestly, this is just my perspective. You're entitled to your own perspective on it for sure. But what I can see is that I read and heard his statement after the fact. And yeah, like maybe prevention is the best cure, but it happened. And so the least he can do is take responsibility for his actions, which he did. Make amends, make apologies, which he did. Outline and say the ways in which he understands it was unacceptable, which he did. And so it's like that point of, you know what, he has my forgiveness because I've been there. I've acted out of reaction. I've acted out of anger. I've done things, said things, acted out behaviors that I later regretted. Sure, for sure I did. But I learned from it, and you know what? Will's gonna have to now live with that for the rest of his life. So the last thing he needs is everyone else to be shaming him or blaming him or judging him for, you know, that decision he made in the moment. Who can say standing in his shoes you wouldn't have done the same thing? Maybe that's the point here. Who can say that you wouldn't have done the same thing standing in his shoes? You can say you would have done something differently standing outside of his shoes as the observer looking on the outside, looking in and saying he did wrong and I would have done better. But we don't really know if you would have done better standing in his shoes as him, considering his life experience and everything he's been through and all his, you know, conditioning and the pressures he feels and the weight he puts on his shoulders. You know, like, you cannot say that you would have done anything any differently, you know. So it's just this point of like, you know what, I really feel for the guy. I really feel for him because you know he regrets it. You know he wished it would have never happened, and now he's got to live with that for the rest of his life. And so I just really felt for him. I just really felt his heartbreak of like that point of like, when you cross a line, you know, when you cross a line and the words have been spoken and the action's been taken, there's no taking that back. And You know, it's just like that point of like, he has to live with that now for the rest of his life. And it's like, you know, I just really feel for him. And even taking all that ownership and taking all that responsibility and knowing you cross the line, it's that point of like, you can never go back. What's done is done. It's done. But I can tell you, I think it's a great lesson for all of us, for whichever way we reflect upon it. It's a really interesting point for humanity to reflect on. How many of us act out in anger? How many of us act impulsively and then later regret it? And if we do that, from my perspective, there's always a silver lining. There's always a way to learn and to grow from what was done. And it's never a waste. It doesn't ever have to be a waste. You know, like, yeah, maybe it would be better if it didn't happen, but it happened. So it's like that point too of accepting the fact that, you know, sometimes shitty things happen. Sometimes shitty behaviors happen. Sometimes we do things and say things that we later regret. But it's like, instead of dwelling on what was and how it played out and why it played out, how can we make it better? How can we make amends for it? How can we grow from it? How can we learn from it? How can we make it the best outcome from it, you know? So I say, everyone, take back your judgments and your blame and your pointing fingers, and maybe turn it towards yourself and consider, would you be any different in standing in his shoes? And you can't say for sure that you would have. So you know what? Give Will the peace to process what he lived and expressed and the consequences he now has to face for that, and worry about yourself. And if you're not willing to forgive or to see how he was willing to take responsibility for himself, or, you know, that he is able to acknowledge the mistake he made, I think that is a big error that we have then in humanity, because we're not practicing that point of unconditional forgiveness and like letting people take responsibility and then letting it go and letting that be okay, and not holding people to their mistakes for the rest of their life. Can we forgive? Can we forgive and let go? Can we move on? Or will we always forever hold things against people and hold on to the past and hold on to these moments and never allow them to be done, you know? So Will, I feel for you, guy, and I wish you and your family all the best. And, you know, I think that it's a very specific point for everyone involved, and everyone can find something within it that is their responsibility to the creation of that moment, and they can reflect and grow from. And people can come together stronger, more unified because of it. So maybe it was a blessing. It could be a blessing for a lot of people, even those that are witnessing like you and I. So, yep, just wanted to share that for today. Thanks for following along, and see you next week for Tuesday Newsday.